I love finding old sources for my new process to buy old comic books. Hey there, today I have an unboxing video, and in this video I'm going to open up an order of comic book back issues that I placed at MyComicShop. This is a source of mine that I've used off and on over the years, but not as frequently as I have been recently, and part of that is because I have stopped buying or participating in auctions on HipComic. Infinity Comics, I've talked about this for a while now. It was a great source for me personally of finding not only just great comic books in general, but a lot of key issues, some personal grails even. I was able to get a copy of those comic books in a particular condition at a certain price point that really aligned with how I collect, and was really kind of disappointed when they took a turn and decided to sell and auction a little bit differently. I've talked about this in the past, but in generally, it just seemed like there was a different person running the auctions. I ended up getting charged multiple times just because they were sold by different owners, even though it was all kind of the same person. And I don't think there was anything nefarious or shady going on with it. It just didn't really leave me feeling pretty good about the situation. And then logistically, two things really bothered me. It was the lack of scans on the back of the book. It looked almost like they just were going to go ahead and give you the front of the book and the bag and board, and that was it. And then they also did not provide their estimated grade. And those were two really key components of me going through and using them as a source that I could actually, go through some number of scans, front and back, zoom in, and then a fallback if I was a little uncertain about the condition that I saw. I could look at their estimated grade, and their estimated grade was not always perfect, but at least it gave me kind of an idea of the kind of book that I was working with. The reason that I shifted to MyComicShop is, first of all, the amount of volume, the inventory that they deal with, the number of comic books that they're consistently posting each and every day. There's definitely supply there. The prices, depending on the condition, I think that's going to be something that I will learn from and experiment with and track, of course, and share with you as far as what I'm paying for the books. So if you stay to the end of this video, you'll see the price that I paid for these. And I'll have to determine over time is if the price that I'm paying for these books, if it's worth it as compared to maybe participating in auctions. MyComicShop does deliver for the most part. I'd say in some rare cases, maybe it's a book that is in a lower grade where they don't really feel like they have to provide the scans, but they will provide a front and back scan of the book, which has helped me make more of an informed decision. And it's a little bit of a needle in the haystack sort of situation that's maybe more in line with how I shop on Mile High Comics than it is how I participate in auctions. And what I mean by that is because of the volume and the magnitude of the number of comic books that they make available, it's hard to find which comic books are actually the deals. And it's not always about the price, it's the alignment of price and condition that makes me ultimately decide to move forward. So I want to do a couple of things here. I want to show you the books that I ordered, share with you the price that I paid, and then compare everything against fair market values, and then determine if I want to go ahead and move forward and get these books clean pressed and graded by CGC. The other thing is certainly share kind of the experience that I have with how they pack books, and a little bit of foreshadowing for a future video is that I'm also trying to sell on MyComicShop, and I just started that process. So I will share with you more details about selling on the platform. But one of the things that I wanted to try first was purchasing and get a consistent shipment of books sent back to me of key back issues that I want to target, and take a look at how they handle the books, and then ultimately how their listed condition ends up working out in comparison to the final grade that I would give to these books. But rather than talk about it, let me go ahead and get this order unboxed so you can see which 5 comic books I picked up from MyComicShop. All right, here it is. This is a very, very nicely packed, at least from the outside, box. Really super sturdy. It came USPS priority mail. I did have to pay for tax and shipping. They do not offer a free shipping option, so there is that to take into consideration. But a really nice, well put together box. So see how they ended up packing the books on the inside, and let's take a look. Okay, here's what I'll say is I definitely need to open more My Comic Shop packages because I completely annihilated this, just shredded the whole thing. Not maybe the best way to open it. I have to. It's kind of like a flat box sort of thing, and there's probably an easier way to get that unpacked, and I just really just kind of hulked out on it and ripped it apart. But everything was well packed, and it looks like some of the comics even came in Mylar, which is super nice. But essentially, the way that it was packed was it was taped to this piece of cardboard, and then there was brown paper that kind of surrounded the whole thing. So the books were not going to move around, and then the brown paper kind of sat on top of it. And so the books were not like super well protected, like there was no bubble wrap or anything on it, but it was okay. The box is like super sturdy. I had to really exert a lot of strength to tear it apart. The corners are really sturdy in the packing tape that they use. So I have no issues necessarily with how they pack. I just need to figure out a better way to kind of get through their typical shipping box, not as straightforward as Mile High Comics. But let's take a look at the 5 books that I picked up from My Comic Shop, and we will start here with Star Wars number 39. And around this time of Empire Strikes Back, it was the Marvel Super Special magazine, and there's a little bit of a debate in terms of which is like the first appearance of the Empire Strikes Back characters, specifically Boba Fett. And really, the debate is between a magazine and a comic book. And for as long as I've been a comic book collector, it's the comic book first appearance that matters. But what's interesting is that this is a reprint of the magazine content that has been reissued as a comic book. And it's a little convoluted, but reprint or not, I go with the comics. This is not Boba Fett's first appearance, but this is the beginning of the adaptation of the Empire Strikes Back. Super great Darth Vader cover. I whiffed on an issue of this not too long ago where it came back as a 9.2, and I thought it was in a much higher grade. And so I took a chance at this, paying a little bit more to get this copy in high grade. And this was listed on My Comic Shop as an 8.5, and just kind of giving it a once over. I did look at the front and back scan of this, and I think that their grading is more or less accurate. I did notice a couple of color breaking ticks, and they're very small, but you can see one right there. And this is one of the books that they sent in the Mylar. So it's very nicely protected. Actually, really a very nice, clean presentation of the book. But again, a really nice, strong copy. And looking at it just from the front cover, without scrutinizing the condition too much, I would probably say it's a little bit closer to a 9.2, maybe a 9.0 at worst, just as is raw. And so just from kind of the first book experience, extremely small sample size of 1, it looks like it was slightly undergraded, but this is some of the experimentation that I'm going to be doing going forward. The next one also in a pretty rigid, sturdy, like a semi-rigid, almost like a top loader. And this is Eternals number 2. And this was in fact listed as a 9.2 raw. And I went ahead and took a chance. Now, this wasn't cheap for sure, but I think I certainly appreciate the packing on this. I mean, there's no way, even if I push as hard as I can, I'm going to probably cut my thumb before I would bend this here. And so you can see the corners and the edge. Everything about this book is super sharp. And when I examined the scans here, I really thought this was a 9.8 candidate, and really appreciate the extra packing here. And you can see right there, which is kind of nice, more than I can from any other store. We'll be able to take a look and confirm the grade here. A 9.2 near mint minus And I didn't do it on the Star Wars book, but yeah, there it is, 8.5, very fine plus. And so I really like how there's a barcode. Everything really seems nicely streamlined and tied back, where this is a unique item in their system. And so everything's nice and trackable, which I love. But Eternals #2, of course, Eternals written, illustrated by Jack Kirby. This is the first appearance of Ajak, and then also the first appearance of the Celestial Arishem. So I'll be really interested to see how this turns out, because these books that I am buying, I'm trying to find those candidates to continue on and further investment in time in getting them cleaned up and pressed and graded out. And again, trying to find those very specific books that have that kind of potential, which is a bit of a chore, but instead of spending hours and hours preparing for an auction, I can certainly browse through the MyComicShop inventory. The next book is Fantastic Four 247. This book got on some hot lists recently after I picked this up, which was better for me. This is the first appearance of Christoph Bernard, the adopted son of Doctor Doom, the heir to Latveria. And then later on, about 30 issues later, he actually appears as Doctor Doom, and this character is making a comeback in a current and future storyline in Marvel Comics. And I just love Doom covers, love Fantastic Four books with Doom on the front, and there are many of those. John Byrne on this one, right in the thick of his run. And I got this as a VF copy for an extremely reasonable amount. And once again, just trying to find the books similar to how I would assess them at Infinity Comics in the scans, of first starting with spine and corners along the spine and just general edges, things like that. You could just kind of get an idea. Not every VF book is the same, and it does seem like sometimes they're accurate or sometimes they're undergraded, but rarely do I find the books on MyComicShop to be overgraded. So what that does is, when I'm performing my analysis across some number of books, is that I can more or less be confident that it will be at least that grade. And then that's how I go through my projections to figure out, okay, in a worst case scenario, if I purchase a VF copy and it comes back VF as a worst case, then what am I left with? And then also the potential if it is undergraded. But so far, I haven't seen books around, like I said, the 7.5 to 9.2 range where I feel like it's been really drastically overgraded. One of the challenges I have with Mile High Comics is I do believe that their grading standards allow for color breaking ticks and things that really don't lend the books to being available for improvement. And in particular, I feel like the older the book, the more lenient they are with their own grading. And I wanted to take an example of a book where we went way back, Tales of Suspense, number 77. And yes, Ultimo lives. This is Ultimo's first appearance. But in story, this is actually the first appearance of Peggy Carter. And this book picked up so much heat back in the days of the original phases of the MCU, Peggy Carter making her debut in live action. This book was pretty much unattainable for me just because the character had become so popular. And now here, many years later, I'm able to finally own a copy. And this, I would say, again, a 7.5, that's probably exactly what it is. We have a crease down here that breaks color, and then a really nice, consistent section of the spine. And then right here by the staple, some general wear. Some color breaks right there in the green Ultimo Lives box, and then a nice run again of strength and consistency, no breaks, and then some stress along the spine. And yeah, I think, to be fair, it's probably a 7.5, and I think if I remember right, looking at the scan, I'm like, that seems about right. That's okay with me to pay the fair market value of this book raw, because I think even if I were able to get a grade bump up into an 8, possibly even an 8.5, that's probably where this book hits a ceiling at most. And certainly, I know that these types of defects on books really get punished by CGC. Not only is there this line that breaks color, but we have a corner that is also taking a hit there. So yeah, it'll probably end up grading somewhere between a 7 and an 8, which is completely fair. But definitely consider that to be high grade for the book featuring the first appearance of Peggy Carter. That book released in 1966. And then also in a kind of a rigid mylar, as is this book here. This one, really excited about, really hopeful about. My very first copy of G.I. Joe #1. I have a little bit of a quick and silly story about this. My cousin actually had this, and I was so kind of desperate for G.I. Joe comics, and it was probably at my LCS for something like $20 or something like that. It just, and for me, at the time that this came out in 1982, $20 was way more money than it would take me weeks and weeks and months of allowance to save for it. And my cousin had a copy, and I offered him a trade straight up. I had Silver Surfer #1, not the original Silver Surfer, the series that began around the same time, maybe a little bit later, and offered him straight up Silver Surfer #1 for G.I. Joe #1, and he made the right decision and said no. And I was crushed at the time, ended up having to leave my family visit to hang out with my cousin, and we had a great time looking at comics, talking about comics, and just kind of had to walk away from a deal. And I still remember that, and it still sits with me. And of course, now, many, many years later, it's so awesome to finally just kind of hold this book in my hands. Again, well protected by MyComicShop. Love this additional semi-rigid Mylar bag that they're using. And this one I picked up also in a VF Plus 8.5. And when I gave this a look, to me what it seemed like is it was hard to tell from the scan, but just a slight stack increase. You can kind of see it right there as that little beam of light is reflected. That's kind of where the stack increase is. But from a structural perspective, it just looked really nice and clean, and I was very excited here. Sharp corners, just everything about this book looked to be as strong a copy as you'll see, reminiscent of some of the copies I saw on Infinity Comics that were going for just about what I paid on MyComicShop. And speaking of, let me show you what I did end up paying for these books, because I think that the first impression that I have with the comics is that I'm getting them, as I said, at the listed grade or maybe even slightly better. And that makes me feel really good. But maybe what doesn't make me feel good is the price that I paid. And that's kind of the decision that I had to make, which is similar to the decision that I make when I shop at Mile High Comics, is that I have to really understand that I'm going to pay a premium for these higher grade comics instead of doing what we all want to do, which is get high grade books for the least amount of money. And so there is that risk of maybe over investing in a book or overbidding in a book because you feel like it has some potential, and then you get the book home and it has some little tear or something that you missed. So let me show you the books, the listed conditions, show you what I paid for the books, and do some comparisons there so I can kind of show you exactly how these line up with fair market value. And then if I were to get the books graded, is there any potential left in them based on what I paid? Let's check out the numbers. All right, here is the order summary for the comic book back issues that I picked up from MyComicShop on January 11th, 2025. And you can see right from the total invoice that this was not cheap. I had to pay fair market value or above, or you may argue I overpaid. But in order to get these books in the condition that I'm seeking with that potential, and my fingers are crossed with some of these books, I think the Tales of Suspense, as we looked at, I think that's a solid 7.5, and I'm okay with that, particularly also if you're cheating and getting ahead of me and looking at the cover price fair market value column. You'll see why I went ahead and splurged on that book at the price that I did. But let me go through and break down the totals for this invoice and how we kind of arrived here. I had to pay $21.10 to ship these books priority. You know, priority shipping is what it is. I think this is a little bit much. So it was definitely the handling and the packing that I had to pay for additionally. But As I mentioned, many of the books, 3 out of the 5, in fact, had rigid mylar protection over the comics, which was awesome. Sometimes with Mile High Comics, the comic book is just loose in the bag. So it's really nice and comforting knowing that they definitely understand these bigger books, these bigger value books, and protecting them. So that's great. So it is something, again, I'm willing to pay for that type of service. And so far, this order has met and exceeded my expectations. I also had to pay tax on these books, but it is something that I'll have to bake into my formulas to determine, which books are the ones that I want to focus on moving forward. So just real quick, $115 for Tales of Suspense 77, $27 for Star Wars 39, a whopping $200 for G.I. Joe #1. Still wish my cousin had just traded me for the Silver Surfer because I can get that Silver Surfer #1 for $5 or $10. But again, he made the right call there. Fantastic Four 247. I paid $8. That book has jumped a little bit in value, so that feels like a nice little pickup there, even at $8. And then Eternals #2. Was really happy to get that one for $33.25, listed as a 9.2 raw, which even a 9.2 raw, a book from 1976, pretty amazing. And then if I just compare the books to kind of the general cover price fair market value here in column U, and then also factor in the per cost book here under that total cost column, what I ended up doing is I take the cost of the book to purchase, the tax, and then the shipping and handling, and I distribute that across the 5 books in the order, and that's where you see the cost per book jump up here. And then I compare it here, the raw value column, to see, okay, if I've spent this much money versus the cover price fair market value, then what kind of raw value am I potentially adding to my collection? The 4 books here, other than Tales of Suspense, are a break-even or negative, and I'm paying that premium. Very similar explanation to how I operate with Mile High Comics, where I understand that I'm not really trying to flip these books raw. These are books that I want to keep in my personal collection. Maybe it's an upgrade, or it's a book that I want to try and further invest in. Now, the interesting part to me was Tales of Suspense 77 really blew up on my radar because, according to cover price, that book in high grade, probably a near mint copy. I'm not sure why someone would be selling it raw near mint, but $262 is what cover price is reporting that book at. And I had a total cost of $130 there for $131.86 of value potentially. But that is because there is not a grade listed. And so what I'd like to do is just put the grade in here of what was listed. So for Eternals #2, for example, it was listed as a 9.2. And if we put the grades in here at 9.2, now we can kind of see maybe an adjusted fair market value for the books raw. And still at a 7.5, we still have cover price holding strong at 262, which really helps that raw value add. The values that pop in here in this column are the CGC values if I were to send these books straight away to CGC as is and they were to come back at the listed grade. Now, I did not buy these books because I thought that that's exactly what would happen. Of course, I'm looking for potential. Eternals #2 in a 9.2, nice value at $77 that justified the roughly $40 in total cost. But Fantastic Four 247 at $36, and even Star Wars 39 and 8.5 at $55 based on the total cost plus the cost of grading and shipping and all of those things. Really not a benefit here to continue on at that grade. G.I. Joe, again, you may be questioning why I would spend that much money on it. And 8.5 has a CGC value of $158. I could have just bought an already slabbed copy outright instead of paying after tax and shipping $223.22 for it with a pretty significant $89 loss. I feel like that book is at least a 9.2, maybe a 9.4. But it is going to require some love and attention from a presser, so that's where I will most likely allow that book to continue on in its journey, and we can look at maybe some potential values there. Tales of Suspense #77 and a 7.5 is interesting here. I'm going to guess that cover price has this overvalued at $262 because the CGC 7.5 is $163, which is more or less kind of a break even if I want to send that book off for grading. But again, I feel like there is some potential there to maybe, hopefully, maybe squeeze out an 8.0 out of it, just get a little bit of a bump. But for me personally, it was with a little bit of potential, yes, hopefully to get some value gains or move it up into its highest possible grade and then get it slabbed and protected moving forward. I love that Tales of Suspense series. So many great Marvel characters made their first appearances there. So what I want to do is just talk potential here for a second. I think I've examined and talked about Tales of Suspense 77 and the condition probably being capped around an 8.0, so I'm not going to even bother. Well, I am just for fun. Let's change it to 9.8. It's a $2,700 book and a 9.8. That's fine. It's not a 9.8 candidate. But the others might be, and just for fun, just to see what the ceiling is if I were to flip all of these to a 9.8. And then you can see in a CGC value, they all have some potential for growth. Eternals number 2 in a 9.8 is $156. Fantastic Four 247 and a 9.8 is 122. G.I. Joe number 1 inching closer to $1,000 in a 9.8. And then Star Wars 39 at $180. So if these were the final grades after sending these off for cleaning, pressing, and grading by CGC, then I look a little bit smarter about the purchases. But then when we go back and put them at their listed condition, again, probably not so smart with G.I. Joe, but it remains to be seen just kind of how these books end up turning out. So I think for me personally, after having gone through the order summary, the condition of the books, and then what I ended up paying for them, it definitely feels like I'm definitely getting high quality, high grade comics, but it is coming at a pretty hefty price. And it's not so much my concern about whether or not they may grade out or will they be able to be improved. I do believe that in my experience, there will be some improvement, but what I've ended up doing is I'm introducing a lot of risk if they don't get as much of an improvement. If we're talking about one grade up from the listed, condition, so this really nice Star Wars 39, if this comes back, it was an 8.5 and it gets a 9, there's a little bit of a increase in value, but I've paid so much for it, and I think that that's what's a little bit concerning to me is these were the books that I would bid on at auction and probably get them for maybe 20 to 30% less than what I paid here. Now, what's also nice is I don't have to stress about the competition. Like I said, the prep work, the timing and all of that, and your time is valuable, but it sort of remains to be seen. I mean, certainly if that G.I. Joe comes back as a 9.8, then the margin between my total investment and that final 9.8 slab value, it's significant enough and very nice. But it's really the what if scenario in the wrong direction where it came back a 9.0, then I look kind of silly paying that much for the raw book. The last thing I will say about the price on MyComicShop is that I do believe that their grades are accurate, so you can more or less blindly purchase when you see that listed grade, at least in this small sample. I feel really confident about the grades, but so are the prices. The prices are accurate too, and I think it's more challenging to find a good deal. And so that is, you could be discouraged when you get on to MyComicShop and you're looking at the wealth of comic books between like the 6.0 and the 8.0 range. They're not giving those books away, and so that's something else that you want to be mindful of, is that if you find a book and it is in a condition that you're looking for or you're willing to kind of settle on and pay for it, you are going to pay for it. They're very accurate with their pricing as it pertains to fair market value as well. It'll be interesting to see the journey that these books go on. I do feel like many of them are going to be in future CGC unboxing videos, and that's kind of the whole point of what I'm doing with these at this point. And then hopefully, too, you'll appreciate the fact that all 5 of these books are significant one way or another. And even though there's a little bit of pain in my stomach when I see the total amount that I've paid for 5 comic books, I am actually more excited going forward to kind of focus it in on more specific keys. And I'd rather spend this amount of money on these 5 books, frankly, than maybe 30 or 40 books of lesser value that kind of add up, and really trying to shift more about quality over quantity going forward. And to my cousin who wouldn't make that trade with me for that Silver Surfer #1, I finally, after all these years, got my very own copy of G.I. Joe #1. Thanks for watching. Happy collecting, and see you next time.